Welcome, I'm Rose Martin, and we are right around the corner at Smith Mountain Lake with James Morrison. You might recognize James's name because perhaps you're familiar with his book, Bedford Goes to War, the heroic story of a small Virginia community during World War II. But he also has a novel. It's a fictional account, The Class of 1940 Coming of Age in World War II. This is a compelling book that takes us on the journey of high school students, the choices they make, their lives, the impact of what those choices are, and at the same time, it puts a face on a generation that so many of us know and love so well. So I'm so happy, James, welcome to Right Around the Corner.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
And your home is so beautiful. It's so nice to be able to be here at the lake in your beautiful home.
Thank you so much.
So I have to know, what actually prompted your idea of wanting to write about World War II? Did you have family members who served?
Well, I did have a father who served in the military, and I served, and our son has served in the Army too.
And thank you for your service.
Thank you. When I retired from the Pentagon and we moved down here to Smith Mountain Lake, the Sedalia Center, which is a small cultural arts center north of Bedford, had a contest for an original drama about Bedford County sometime after the Civil War. So I knew how important World War II was for Bedford. And so I decided I would try my hand at writing a play or a drama. I'd never done that before. So
okay, wait. You've never written a play before.
Never written a play
and you're
before.
living here as an adult, and you saw a contest and thought, you know what?
Right.
I think I can write a play.
Right, and I wanted to write in my retirement. So I wrote a play, and it was also called Bedford Goes to War. I don't tell how many entries there were, but there were at least there were at least two, let me say that. And so it won the contest, and they performed the play 8 times over 3 summers. And after that, I decided then to take my research and turn it into a book, which is also titled Bedford Goes to War.
Were you always a researcher as a young boy? Were you always digging into the story behind the story?
I used to write a lot. The first story I ever wrote was, I was in the 3rd grade, and I wrote a story about working for Harry Truman in the White House. And Harry's piano playing and Margaret's singing drove me crazy, and I ran away and went to Egypt and joined the French Foreign Legion. And one day a big ship came in through the Suez Canal, and it was Harry and Margaret. They got off, and I went crazy.
As a 3rd grader?
3rd grade, yes. I still have that story.
Oh, that's wonderful. And not too many 3rd graders, I don't think, would be writing such a detailed historical account. Where did that worldview and that interest in the things that were happening outside of your own community come from?
I don't really know, because I grew up in Indiana, and I've had a fairly parochial view of things, but so I picked that up someplace. I remember Harry Truman. I was born in 1940, so that was 1948, I think. Yeah.
And what about your family growing up? Writers?
No, my father was an attorney, and my mother was a housewife. I have a sister, but no writers.
Interesting. So you're a young guy now, past 3rd grade, and you're writing about Truman. What was high school like?
High school was, I loved high school. I played athletics, I played football, I played tennis, and had a great time in high school. I still go back. I went to my 60th high school reunion.
I bet that had to be interesting.
It was. Everybody else had gotten older, but I hadn't, So.
Of course, I'd like that too. With the people around us look a lot older than we are, right? And you think they're looking old, but we're still doing great. We are still doing great. So outside of this wonderful play that you wrote that was produced, you've got a plethora of work that extends beyond the 2 books that I mentioned earlier.
Well, when I worked in the Pentagon, I was assigned over for a year and a half at the National Defense University. And while I was over there, I wrote 2 short books. One was on Vladimir Zhirinovsky, who was a Russian ultranationalist, and another one is on NATO expansion. And those are the 2 books that I say you can put on your bedside table, and if you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you can't go to sleep, you pick one of them up and you'll be asleep in 5 minutes. So.
I like that idea, right? What about some of the others? Because there's also essays. And
essays, I started writing about some of the crazy things that had happened to me, and some personal stories, and then I took some of my jokes and turned them into 10-page short stories, and I put all those together just last year in 2017 and came out with a book called Shorts in a Bunch.
So I have to hear one of those stories.
Well, one of the stories was when Edie and I'd started working at the Pentagon, and we lived in an apartment, and we wanted to find a house. So in Washington, they advertise houses on Sunday, that open houses, sometimes by the owner, sometimes by a realtor. And so we saw this house in the Washington suburbs, and I called and made an appointment to go out to this house at 2 o'clock. And so we pull up to this house, we get out, and we go up to the door, and the man opens the door, and we said, "Hi, we're Jim and Edie Morrison." And he says, "Hi, I'm Tom, come on in." So we walk in, and they're sitting there watching the Redskins football game. He and his wife and the two kids, they get popcorn and Cokes. They invited us to sit down, they turned the TV off, they asked us if we wanted Cokes, and we said no thanks. And he worked in the Pentagon, so we chatted for about 20 minutes, and after 20 minutes we said, could we see the house? And he said, sure. So they took us into the kitchen, and we said, could we see the bedrooms? And they took us into the bedrooms. And we said, could we look in the closets? They opened up the closets, very neat and all that. We looked all throughout the house. Came back after the tour of the house, sat down in the living room, and I said, well, how soon are you leaving? And he said, well, I don't really know. I said, you don't know? And he says, no, I don't have my orders for my next assignment in the Army. And I said, you don't have your orders, but you're selling your house? And he said, no. I said, something didn't compute. I said, I don't quite understand this. You are the Smiths, right? And he said, no, we're the Joneses. The Smiths are 2 doors down.
Oh, no.
And they thought we were from their church paying a Sunday afternoon social call. And Edie and I were mortified.
I bet. You just
couldn't
want to
wait
back
get
out.
there.
Like, oh.
We all laughed.
Yeah. And now you're friends. You just.
Well, I know we never saw him again.
Right. Oh, what a great
Fortunately,
story.
yeah.
And, so those are some of the things you put in this other book.
It is, yes. It's a collection of short stories, some fictional stories, true stories, and some poetry, and I got some short plays in there and some essays.
So when you're here now, and I think it's great to take a look back and make some fun and light books like that. The Bedford books are not necessarily like that, though. You've done a lot of research into sharing the stories of this generation of people who have made such a difference, and we're so grateful for the sacrifices that they've made. And I know Carol had read the more historical version, the Bedford Guide to World War II, and we were struck that not only was it a great resource for historians, but for high schools, for people who really wanted to get to know what was going on in the book and what was going on in our world at the time. What was the research like for that book?
Well, I researched 4 places, really. I went to the Bedford Library, and they had on microfilm the Bedford Bulletin, and they also had a Bedford Democrat that I had to get from the Library of Virginia. Bedford had 1 or 2 newspapers that came out weekly, so I read all the newspapers from 1940 to 1945. And then I also went to the courthouse and got some of the records. Fortunately, I got those before they were closed to the public. Went to the Bedford Museum and looked in their archives, and then I interviewed 21 veterans of World War II and then about 14 loved ones. And so I put all this together. So the first part of the book tells what happened to the people in Bedford who served in the military, but also those who served on the home front, what happened on the home front. And then the second part of the book is our personal profiles of about 50 people. And so you get the details of the personal things, but then the overview. So, and some people have said it's kind of encyclopedic because everything I got, I put in there, and I have something like 900 endnotes and all that. So,
and that is a comprehensive look, a comprehensive guide. I think we were touched. I know Carol and I were talking about it. I had a neighbor, and I was telling you this story, who lived a few doors down from me, and he just recently passed away, but was on the second wave, Glenn Mailer, and he landed on the second wave at Omaha Beach. And sitting and listening to him tell those stories, even though his body was giving out, but his mind was so sharp. What was that like for you, interviewing not only the guys who were right there on the front lines, but also those family members who, like you said, were serving at home?
it was very interesting, number one, and also moving. And to hear their stories personally and all that. And I think only 3 of them are survived now to the 21 that I interviewed. And after I wrote the book, when I was doing the research, a couple of them were in the American Legion in Bedford with me. And I'd go to the meetings and they'd say, "How's the book coming?" So I felt pressure to get the book out. And after I got the book out, I went around to their homes and gave them copies. And there was one man, I walked up to the door. He just got out of the hospital. and his wife met me at the door, and I said, "Hi, I'm here to give Kenneth a copy of my book," and she says, "Oh, we were going to buy him one of those for Father's Day, but come on in anyway."
Aw, nice.
So,
well, I'm
yeah.
sure they were so grateful.
But they
you know?
were, but it was a wonderful experience, one of the best experiences of my life. Yeah.
Well, and sharing that with everyone, because you're right, we don't want this story to die. We want to keep it alive and keep the stories alive, but also people remember the sacrifice. There were some funny parts of it, though, and Carol had mentioned how, we didn't, care packages are normal. You'd think that people would send care packages to their loved ones. But then she read the part about like the fried chicken, and we're thinking, how on earth did they do chitlins or fried chicken and mail those as care packages? That doesn't seem like it would taste all right.
I never nailed that down, but I think what they must have done was pressure cooked them and put them in some sort of sealed thing and sent them over there. They were a big hit. Yeah, my
I
wife.
can't even imagine.
Our son served in Kosovo with the army in former Yugoslavia. And Edie would send him care packages with cookies, and whenever the mail clerk got him, they'd yell, "Hey, Sergeant Morrison's got some cookies," and they would all go. He'd have to share the cookies with everybody, and that's what happened in World War II.
Yeah, well, I can imagine sharing cookies. I'm just not so sure about sharing chicken. That would come later on. Yeah. So, what sparked the interest for you in centering the writing that you wanted to do around Bedford and around these heroes and sharing that story?
Just the the great story of Bedford in World War II. Bedford lost 20 men, including 19 on Company A, which is the National Guard unit, on D-Day. But I like to point out that the fact that they lost 20, they lost over 140 men total throughout the war. Yeah. They lost men in all the theaters of combat and all that. In my research, I found that Bedford has honored the people much more than any other community. I mean, there are plaques in almost all the churches over there. They've got plaques at the courthouse. They've got plaques out in front of the old high school. And so they really remembered. Yeah.
Well, and the National D-Day Memorial is a really special place.
Yes, that.
And when you meet people, and you volunteered there for a while, what do you think the stories are that people want others to know? Those pieces, those nuggets of remembrances that are really important for them to share.
I think the sacrifice that these men made, both those who were killed and those who were wounded. We sometimes forget about the wounded, but others, I mean, who've experienced all kinds of things. Nowadays we see post-traumatic stress syndrome, even though people may have not have been injured. So, but the sacrifice is there, but also the sacrifices on the home front. I mean, people scrimped and saved. They donated money for the war bonds. They raised money for war bonds. They did raffles to raise money where somebody would donate something and people would try to bid on that, and whatever they bid on and won would go to purchasing war bonds. So they were going to get their money back later on with interest, but so the prices went way up. So I mean, they auctioned off a pair of a woman's nylon hose, and it brought $3,000 for that. And the people are going to get that back in their war bonds plus interest. But
wow, when you think about that, sure, because they were getting the war bonds as part of that auction, but there were so many other things that happened too, like the victory gardens. Yes. Or the forced blackouts. What was that all about?
Well, I like to tell a story about Lynn Skank. And she was a teacher, had come to Bedford, and she met her husband, John Skank. He worked at a hardware store. And they got married after the war had started. In 1942, he got to leave and came home. And they had a 10-day honeymoon up near Lexington. And then she came back to teach, and he got sent off with his unit down into Florida with Company A from Bedford. And then they got shipped to England, and they trained for 20 months over there. And he was the company clerk. So he wrote to her every day, had a typewriter, and she wrote to him every day. And he sent all of her letters back, and she kept all of his, and then he was killed on D-Day. So they never saw each other, after their 10-day honeymoon. But it had all this wonderful correspondence about back and forth. And she let me use all that in the book, so I've got a lot of quotes out of that. She was fantastic. She had a victory garden. She taught people how to can. She helped people, the men enlist or sign up for the draft. She did checking to make sure people weren't gouging people for the price on the price controls. And so she was just amazing. Edie and I got to know her, and even when she went into the hospital, just a wonderful woman.
So I think you're right about the sacrifice and that commitment. Everyone was involved in making sure that they were doing their part, whether it was at home or whether it was overseas.
They were. They were.
And that's interesting that that's the message that through your interviews that, you know, these heroes would want to have conveyed. What's the message that you would want our viewers to know about you or your readers to know about you?
Well, I enjoy writing, and so I've written pieces for the Roanoke Times, op-eds recently on common sense and gun control and common sense in politics, and I've got another one I just sent them. So I like to try new things. So I started off writing a play, and then I wrote a history and a couple of other books on politics, and done short stories and some short plays too, and a novel. So I'm now trying to turn my novel into a screenplay. So I don't know if it'll ever go anyplace, but I've never written a screenplay, so I like to try new things.
Well, and it's evident in your work, and they're all beautifully written. And congratulations on the awards that your work has taken. So I want to talk about the novel, the 1940 novel where we catch these starts with high school kids, and I love the way it opens. That you give a very quick overview to the readers about World War II, about the D-Day Memorial. With the grandfather talking to the son. How did you decide? You know, with a novel of World War II, you've got to catch people right away. How did you plan that out?
Well, what I wanted to do was, for people who weren't going to read the history about Bedford Goes to War, I wanted to do a novel for people who would read novels. And I wanted to put some of that history in there so people would learn part of the history of Bedford. And so it takes place in a fictional county, Halesford County, next to Bedford, but they come back. The grandfather brings his grandson and his great-grandson back to the D-Day Memorial and make a tour of that. So I wanted to put all that in, and then also have I wanted to put in women. So I've got Army nurses, so that's about half of the book. Read a wonderful book on Army nurses, and that's where I get my research. And so I put it all in there.
So are a lot of the stories true? And that then you fictionalized for part of the book based on the research?
A lot of the stories are true in there, yes. What happened to the Company A from Bedford is what happened to the Company O from Halesford. And the Slapton Sands, where the Germans hit some American ships and killed 700 men. So.
Well, and it opens with the grandfather's reluctancy to really talk about the war and talk about his experiences, which is prevalent with so many of that generation. So that part of it was really interesting. And then you take us to high school, and we're following this group of high school kids with all of the ins and outs of high school. And I love the fact of what you said about the nurses. You've woven a little love story in there through the book, and yet you've focused on these two girls, too, who had to break it to their parents that they wanted to be nurses.
Yes. That was, yeah. So I got a lot of that from that book, because nursing was not the revered profession back in those days. A lot of people didn't like their daughters going into nursing, and they didn't like their daughters going into the Army either.
Well, and even with Jeb his mom being a single parent because of the hunting accident that happened early on, and she really struggled, and yet he had that sense of duty to country that, you know, he knew his mom was going to be heartbroken when he signed up with his friend to join.
A lot of these men from Bedford, I mean, they joined before the war.
Yeah.
So they joined the National Guard, and then they were in. And so once they got into the war, they were in for the duration. So a lot of them had signed up because they could make $1 every Monday night for training, and then make more money on the 2 weeks in the summertime and all that. But they also were patriotic, and they also had the camaraderie of being with other men and getting to shoot rifles and things like that. So a lot of different motivations.
Well, and as you weave the story through, I'm struck by even the people that found themselves face to face with each other again on the other side of the Atlantic. some of his friends from high school. There's people that their paths continue to cross. Yes. And then there's that idea that you touched on beautifully about the why me, like how come some people don't make it back and yet other people did, and that survivor's guilt,
Yes, and there was survivor's guilt, at least the two people I know in Bedford. One man, Bill American, was involved when a German unit caught this forward observation battalion, and they lined them up in a field and mowed them down. It's called the Malmedy Massacre. And two men from Bedford and one from Franklin County were killed, and Bill American survived. He was shot in the back twice, but he survived. And he came back to Bedford. He went back. They hit him in a house, and they sent a note by a boy next door back to American lines. It was kind of no man's land at the time. They brought an ambulance down and rescued these guys. Bill American went back. He found the shed where he hid. He found the house where they hid him in the attic when the Germans came, and he even found the man who was been a 15-year-old boy at the time who had taken this note back to American lines and helped rescue him and saved his life.
Wow. Wow. Would you be willing to read a passage for us?
I'd love to. Good. I'd like to read a couple of excerpts. This is about the heroine, Virginia or Jenny Jackson, and she's sitting at home in both of these excerpts. And she's sitting with her father, Randolph, and her mother, Ruth. And she's telling them that instead of going to Roanoke College, she wants to go to nursing school. And the parents are not thrilled. And Randolph, the father, says, nurses have to do a lot of unpleasant, even demeaning physical work, keeping people clean, helping with bedpans, messing around with needles and blood. That's true, said Ruth. I would think nursing would require a lot of, what shall I say, rather intimate contact with a whole range of people. Some potential suitors might think being a nurse is inappropriate for a proper young lady. You could also be exposed to a lot of diseases. But don't you agree, said Jenny, that being a nurse is a noble profession, that nurses are dedicated to helping others? Every Sunday in church we hear about loving our neighbors and taking care of others. And then she comes up with her final argument. Dad, I've checked out the cost of attending Roanoke College and nursing school is much less expensive. Randolph took another draw on his pipe. Is that right? Well, I might have to look into that. And so she goes to nursing school. And then she comes back after ready to complete nursing school, and she comes back for Christmas vacation. And again, they're sitting there, they have dinner, and they're doing dessert. And she tells her parents that she and her roommate, Liz, are thinking about joining the Army during the war, and she wants to be an Army nurse. And again, her father, Randolph, says, the Army's a rough organization, especially in the field. All sorts of men are being drafted. It's not a safe environment for a young woman. You'd be exposed to a lot of coarse men and situations. I got to see quite a bit of Army medicine when I was wounded in 1918. If you were assigned to a hospital, you'd have to bathe and take care of personal hygiene for a lot of men. If you were assigned to a field hospital, the number of men you'd have to take care of and the type of wounds you'd have to treat could be overwhelming. And it could be dangerous, too. You could be sent overseas and possibly into a combat area. Jenny looked at her father. You volunteered for the Army in 1917, didn't you, Dad? I did. And so I speak from experience. I think you should be very cautious. Jenny smiled at her father. When you were wounded, what did you think of Army nurses? Randolph sat back in his chair, hesitated as though thinking back almost 25 years. A slight smile came across his face. The nurses I came across were very caring toward me, without exception. Some of them were very nice. Randolph, Ruth said, smiling, you never told me about the Army nurses. Look, Jenny, said Randolph, all we ask is that you approach this very carefully. Thanks, said Jenny. I'll definitely think seriously about what you've said, and I'll share it with Liz. We'll be careful. Jenny took an extra large bite of pie, sat back, and savored it.
Mm. And you know what I love? Thank you for reading that for us. I love the fact that you've woven some family drama and there's a few twists and turns coming through the book, and then there's some unexpected ways that we see some of these family dramas play out in the course of history. So, I think preserving this in a way that if you're a historical buff, you can pick up the Bedford book, go for the actual facts and go for the actual research. And then a way to continue the story is by picking up the novel that still has those factual based stories, but in a way that everyone can understand. So what would be your wish between these books for people?
Well, I think for some people who want the history, they like the detail, they like the research, they like the end notes and all that, but others don't want to read history, they want novels, and so it's a little bit for each. It depends on what the reader likes.
Do you feel like you owe anything to the people you interviewed or to the generation?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
What would it be?
That was the greatest generation. We owe them our freedom. Yeah.
By sharing their stories and making sure they stay alive.
Well, and what they did during the war.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what they did during the war.
And also for sharing, yeah. I mean, the fact that a lot of these people wouldn't talk about the war afterwards, particularly the servicemen and all that. They wanted to get back to their jobs, back to their family and all that, and they put that aside, and they didn't want to remember.
Thank you for helping us remember, and thank you for helping us continue to make this story be so important as we continue to grow and have new generations learn about it. It's been wonderful, wonderful talking to you, and I certainly have appreciated it. So special thanks to James Morrison for sharing his great work and his beautiful home right here at Smith Mountain Lake. If you'd like more information about James, all of the work that he's done, the books we've talked about today, those plays, or of course those nightstand books, please check out more of our conversation online. And I'd like to thank you for joining us, and obviously tell your friends all about us. I'm Rose Martin, and I will see you next time right around the corner.
Production funding for Right Around the Corner provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Anne Ray Foundation, and by viewers like you. Thank you.